The accident, or rather the catastrophe that took place, was the biggest technological disaster in human history. The accident affected all of Ukraine, all the systems in Russia, and the USSR, and other countries too. So in my opinion, the people who contained the damage actually saved the whole world.
In 1957, the USSR launched the first artificial Earth satellite. The US followed in 1958. 3 years later, the first human reached outer space. The beginning of the space era coincided with the Great Acceleration. That's how scientists refer to major changes in the world. The global population, economy, number of vehicles, the use of fertilizers have all been growing since then, as well as the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the number of floods, and number of endangered animal species. Satellite communications are worsening. Navigation on Earth has become unreliable. The internet, which everyone has grown so accustomed to, is malfunctioning and losing speed. Our favorite gadgets, a comfortable life in the high-tech world. Everything has lost its meaning. The middle of the 20th century has thus been considered the beginning of the Anthropocene, a new geological epoch in the history of Earth. Near-Earth orbit is littered. It's filled with millions of uncontrollable fragments, big and small. Old out-of-service satellites, pieces of space vehicles. Space debris has enshrouded the planet, and there's no way to collect it. Accidents have become commonplace in orbit. Manned space flights are too dangerous.
Вечером пятницы Андрей Криворученко занимался обычными для сельчанина делами, но в привычный распорядок вмешались вы.
Я дров набрал, и только повернулся по лестнице. Удар такой хлесткий, как бичом таким.
Andrei Krivoruchenko's house is on Cosmonaut Street. On a December night, the roof was pierced by a fragment from a Meridian military and civilian telecommunications satellite, launched from the Russian Cosmodrome in 𝘏𝘃𝗺𝗏, more than 3,000 kilometers away.
Я окошко слуховое открываю, дверку, фонариком туда не полез, а нафиг коврат, там шар такой лежит, думаю, ничего себе.
Novosibirsk region locals found 10 fragments of a satellite weighing between 0.5 and 2 kilograms. They had time to take a couple of pictures of them. Soon the debris was taken away by EMACOM personnel. That was the end of that emergency. The Meridian didn't reach its final orbit and fell, becoming mere junk. The satellite would have turned into space debris that could have caused formidable damage, from millions of dollars in property losses to the loss of life. From an international crisis to the outbreak of war.
Dès 1946, des tests sont menés à grande échelle, notamment sur l'atoll de Bikini. On fait exploser des bombes, puis on leur demande d'aller nettoyer des dégâts ou d'éteindre les incendies. Lincoln Grals fut l'un des 250 000 à 500 000 soldats irradiés lors de ses essais nucléaires. Il avait alors 22 ans.
Ça, c'est l'USS Newark. C'était le bateau sur lequel je me trouvais, la TR-40. Et ce qu'il y a de plus stupide dans tout ça, c'est qu'on était supposé nettoyer les effets des irradiations et on utilisait de l'eau qui avait elle-même été irradiée. C'est tout ce qu'on avait, cette eau irradiée.
L'Amérique rédige le code de Nuremberg. Le contenu en est exemplaire. Celui-ci détermine l'éthique qui doit prévaloir lors des expérimentations pratiquées sur l'être humain. Les Américains puisent dans les connaissances des Allemands et lancent des expériences à tout va, notamment dans des pays qu'elle pense tenir sous sa coupe. C'est ainsi que de 1946 à 1948 au Guatemala, elle inocule des virus comme la syphilis à des centaines de soldats, prostituées, détenus et même des gosses. Bilan 83 morts. Pour cet acte, l'Amérique sera condamnée. Sur le territoire américain, on s'en prend aux démunis, ceux qui n'oseront jamais se plaindre. En 1946 et pendant 7 ans, des dizaines d'enfants malades mentaux sont ainsi nourris de céréales radioactives dans une école du Massachusetts.
C'est une effroyable contradiction, un immense paradoxe, que de voir l'Amérique réaliser toutes ces expérimentations extrêmement dangereuses juste à l'après-guerre. Et ceci alors même que c'est nous qui avons traîné devant les tribunaux de Nuremberg les docteurs nazis en 1946 et en 1947. Nous, pas les Français, pas les Anglais, pas les Russes, mais nous, les Américains. On a traîné ces 23 docteurs et responsables administratifs en justice. On les a sermonnés, harangués. On leur a donné des leçons sur la façon de faire de la recherche médicale. Et au moment où se tenait le procès de ces médecins nazis, nos propres médecins, au Guatemala, injectaient la syphilis à plein de gens dans ce pays. Au même moment, on injectait des patients dans nos hôpitaux avec du plutonium ou d'autres formes d'irradiation. Donc ce n'est pas déplacé de dire que tout ceci n'était qu'une farce, un grand jeu de propagande.
Qu'importe, car la morale des Américains la place bien en dessous de l'intérêt de la nation.
3, 2, 1, fire!
Et au sortir de la guerre, la priorité absolue, c'est le nucléaire.
Nous y rendons en compagnie de responsables kazakhs dans une fourgonnette militaire. Le périmètre de la zone d'essai nucléaire, qu'on appelle ici le polygone, est un territoire immense, grand comme l'île de France. Nous n'en avons vu qu'une petite partie. Voici les images d'époque, des images de propagande. Pendant 40 ans, l'Union soviétique a fait exploser ici 456 bombes atomiques, dont 116 à l'air libre. C'est une bombe de l'intensité d'Hiroshima, pratiquement tous les mois. C'est la guerre froide. Staline dirige d'une main de fer l'Empire soviétique. Il veut tester sa capacité atomique et prouver au monde entier que l'armée rouge a une bombe capable de répondre à celle des Américains. Aujourd'hui, ce territoire est désert, mais les traces des expériences atomiques sont toujours là. Le compteur 𝙏𝙃𝙧𝙖 indique une radioactivité 20 fois supérieure à la norme autorisée. L'une des zones les plus irradiées, la voici. Ce lac, aucun panneau ne le signale. Dans la région, il est appelé le lac atomique. Nous ne pouvons y rester plus de 30 minutes sous peine d'être irradiés. Il a été créé artificiellement par une explosion nucléaire au croisement de deux fleuves, une première à l'époque. La propagande soviétique parlait d'explosion atomique au service de la paix.
L'heure de la première explosion nucléaire s'approche et son objectif est nous apporter la paix. L'appareil automatiquement programmé est en marche. On peut commencer le décompte.
Saddam Hussein was not a joke, that was a regime. Cruel regime. I mean, you cannot.
Mohammed Salam was in Iran with Iraqi troops after one notably brutal battle.
After the battles, I went into the battles, and I found something strange. I found thousands and thousands of Iranian soldiers in trenches holding their AKs and dead. Couldn't understand what happened. They had no bullet wounds. They had nothing. They simply had blood on their noses and mouth, and they had urinated in their clothes. And we started counting and counting and counting. It was a full day counting bodies, lines of bodies like the photos of World War I in trenches.
In the Arab press, there was no outrage.
Iraq came out victorious, period.
That chemical attack was one of the first of a series launched by Saddam Hussein. Recently declassified CIA documents have revealed that the Reagan administration knew about Saddam Hussein's use of chemical weapons, and they suspected he might get away with it.
It's easy for people that live in the Western countries to judge or blame the Somalis. It's okay. But there's always two sides on every coin. We all want to have cheap sushi, but nobody asks where does that tuna come from.
The elders told Sam they watched in anger as their waters were exploited and then poisoned. 𝙏𝙃𝙀𝙃𝙀𝙃 is one of Sam's cousins who turned to piracy.
markii aan arkay in macnaha maraakiibtii kuwa xamuulka hawaan aragnay aan darajaan aragnay ilaahay way noqteen iyagoo bad ku shubaya sun oo soo cali wixii badda noole ku jiray oo dhan sidaas macnaha aniga u kalifteenaan macnaha ama chief ahaado ama kalbu ahaado isugu mid aan ka dhignaa.
Marine scientists say they have identified in the Pacific Ocean more than 25,000 barrels that they believe contain the toxic chemical DDT, a massive underwater toxic waste site dating back to World War II, has long been suspected off the shore of Southern California, given industrial companies had used the ocean as a dumping ground there until 1972. But as Stephanie Tsai reports, the magnitude of this problem was not previously known.
That's right, Judy. Staggering, overwhelming. That was how researchers described the amount of these potentially toxic barrels they mapped in a survey last month. The Scripps Institution of Oceanography team used autonomous underwater vehicles and sonar to survey 36,000 acres of a dump site that lies between the coast off Los Angeles and Catalina Islands.
Well, this may look like any ordinary field in France. Let me assure you, it's not. Because buried underground are hundreds of thousands of cubic meters of nuclear waste. Things such as tools and clothing used in the nuclear industry. While it may not be the most radioactive, it does represent the large majority of nuclear waste. Rows of cylinders in metal and concrete spread out over 15 hectares, and here they will stay, monitored for 300 years, kept from harm's way thanks to a synthetic membrane mixed with layers of sand, bitumen and earth. Together, this waste represents 97% of radioactive material. So what about the other 3%? Well, now, that's known as high-level waste. And now we're getting serious. That's the used fuel that comes from inside the core of the reactor. And it's hazardous, so much so it needs to be isolated for 100,000 years. Did you say 100,000 years? Yeah. France relies on nuclear for a massive 75% of its electricity. That's more than any other country. As a result, it produces enough toxic radioactive waste every year to fill 120 double-decker buses with 2 kilograms for every French person. But it's by no means alone. Today, 30 countries host a total of 449 nuclear reactors. And there's more on the way, with 60 under construction. The amount of waste in the world is multiplying, and that's before things go wrong. Japan is still struggling with an ever-growing pile of radioactive waste in the wake of the 2011 tsunami, including 400 tons of contaminated water every day. Nuclear may be relatively cheap and reliable, but it's not always simple. Everyone seems to agree on one point. This high-level radioactive waste is a real problem, No one has found an ideal solution for the long term. A little like we're all flying on an aeroplane with no runway to land.
Sunny is taking us to a damaged wellhead that leaked over a year ago, polluting the river for miles around. Sunny, you tell me exactly where we're going now, mate. We're going into the mangrove swamp, yeah?
We are going to...
It's an oil well. You can actually smell the oil now.
Film, yeah.
You just get patches of just really thick clots of oil. I mean, I find it hard to believe that anything can actually live in this, but they're saying that they still catch a small quantity of fish. This is the oil well. A wellhead, basically, that's been tapped off. The smell, the stink of the oil now is overwhelming. The water's just got blacker and blacker. And it's hot, I can feel it's hot now. It's hot here. Why is that? It's the pressure from the wellhead. Way below us now, oil is trying to come up here, and that's stopping it. You know when people bunker oil, they steal oil illegally. Could they steal it from there?
Yeah, they get access to this. Yeah. Then open the valve there, connect their pipe to it.
Yeah.
As they open it, the thing gushes out to a standby tanker. Another way they do it is just on the pipeline.
Yeah.
They get to where there's a valve.
A valve, yeah.
Yeah. They open it.
Take it straight out.
Yeah.
Are people coming stolen from this?
Yeah, through the sea.
They come in from the sea, big barges.
Barges, yeah.
And they just
launch them
all along this. So the heavens are just about to open up, and I have to say, that might be a bad thing because it might give us some relief. My eyes are streaming, the back of my throat is burning, and it's very hard to believe that the people still actually manage to live in this environment. For one of the many deserted wellheads in the area that the oil companies claim to have cleaned up.
So as you see, they have cleaned the spill. So what they call cleanup has been done.
Doesn't look very clean to me. It's still leaking oil.
Leaking, and look at this.
This is supposedly
This is cleanup. This is the cleanup you hear they say they do.
In the short time that we are here, it's difficult to get a precise picture of what exactly is going on.
Commence a ser quick, you know, Sarsuma. Ma la face wa ben fanulu, no we baie. In feite, na requiere musite sani, wandam. De crescent sem great open. Da ala mai dusa ma musi. Overheid komt iemand trainen dat die heren om aan serve worko o eso da worko zonder pik da milieu in het vervuil molo dus da ashiti que su alternatief já consorbi tak disi na disco musoroko da we teke abranda we bakwe nem mais feito para o Uno, nem que mais aí o Uruguai, o Edo da presa. Mas assim a nível nem mais Uruguai. E assim a nível só nem mais Uruguai daqui. E tem que estar caneta mara e ficar melhor Uruguai, nem mais pura assim a nível. Nem mais não pura moro então. Esse, a coisa que saiu o Uruguai, a não fala que moro lek a assim a nível só nem pique podrece Uruguai. Na planti, uiteindelijk voordeel zal de bedrijf, de man nog hebben na de Chima. Dat de man is man.
Suriname is the world's most densely forested country. More than 90% of its territory is covered by jungle. But once mercury is burned in the mines or by smelters, it's carried hundreds of kilometers by trade winds, deposited by rainfall, eventually contaminating pristine ecosystems.
Even when you stop mercury tomorrow, it's still there. The mercury that's already in the system will remain there for ages. It binds to small sediment particles. Those settle on the bottom. A fish comes, goes around in the mud, and the mercury is released again and available for organisms for take-up.
Climate change stands to affect all life on this planet. From monster storms, raging wildfires, record droughts, ice caps melting, acidification of the oceans to entire countries going underwater, that could all be caused by humans' demands on the Earth. I wanted to do everything I could to help. I made up my mind right then and there to change how I lived and to do whatever I possibly could to find a way for all of us to live together, in balance with the planet sustainably forever. I became an OCE, Obsessive Compulsive Environmentalist. I separated the trash and recycling, I composted, changed all the light bulbs, took short showers, turned the water off when I brushed my teeth, turned off lights when leaving the room, and rode my bike instead of driving everywhere. But as the years went by, it seemed as if things were getting worse. I had to wonder, with all the continuing ecological crisis facing the planet, even if every single one of us adopted these conservation habits, was this really going to be enough to save the world? There was something more to the story. I thought I was doing everything I could to help the planet. But then, with one friend's post, everything changed. The Post sent me to a report online published by the United Nations stating that raising livestock produces more greenhouse gases than the emissions of the entire transportation sector. This means that the meat and dairy industry produces more greenhouse gases than the exhaust of all cars, trucks, trains, boats, planes combined. Cows and other farmed animals produce a substantial amount of methane from their digestive process. Methane gas from livestock is 86 times more destructive than carbon dioxide from vehicles. Here I've been riding my bike everywhere to help reduce emissions, but it turns out there's more to climate change than just fossil fuels. I started doing more research. The UN, along with other agencies, reported that not only did livestock play a major role in global warming, it is also the leading cause of resource consumption and environmental degradation destroying the planet today. How is it possible I wasn't aware of this? I thought this information would be plastered everywhere in the environmental community. I went to the nation's largest environmental organizations' websites, 350.org, Greenpeace, Sierra Club, Climate Reality, Rainforest Action Network, Amazon Watch, and was shocked to see they had virtually nothing on animal agriculture. What was going on? Why would they have this information on their main page? It seemed the main focus for many of these groups was natural gas and oil production, with fracking being the latest hot issue due to water usage and contamination. Hydraulic fracturing for natural gas uses an incredible amount of water. A staggering 100 billion gallons of water is used every year in the United States. But when I compared this with animal agriculture, raising livestock just in the US consumes 34 trillion gallons of water. And it turns out the methane emissions from both industries are nearly equal. Living in California, a state plagued by drought and water shortages, water use is a major concern for many.
We have to be mindful of the way we use water. We have to use it as efficiently as possible. We have to protect its quality, and we have to be good stewards of the environment that depend on water.
And checking the sprinklers, a lot of time we get a lot of leaks and broken sprinklers and things like that that wastes water. And those are the areas that there's a lot of room for conservation.
It kept on coming up, allows of animal agriculture. Can you comment on that at all, about how much that plays a role in water consumption and pollution?
That's, that's not my area.
There's one study that found that 1 pound of beef, 2,500 gallons of water. The eggs is 477 gallons of water.
and she's almost 900 gallons. Just wondering if that is really the case. I think that the water footprint of animal husbandry is greater than other activities. There's no ifs, and, or buts about it. That would be really powerful, just rather than waiting till we're in a drought. You know, what do you think about just starting now and whoever's in charge of the Save Our Water, hey, let's start encouraging people to eat less meat now, because these studies are coming out. I don't think that'll happen. Why? I don't think that'll happen. Why? Because of the way government is set up here. It's interesting though. Why though? One is water management and the other one is behavior change. Wow. Clearly the government did not want to talk about this issue. Their inability to answer, along with the environmental organization's silence on the topic of animal agriculture, made it seem something more was going on. I started doing more investigating on the impacts of livestock and found out the situation was actually worse than I had thought. The transportation and energy sectors are understandably given a lot of attention because of the terrible impact carbon dioxide is having on our climate. But animal agriculture produces 65% of the world's nitrous oxide, a gas with a global warming potential 296 times greater than CO2 per pound. Yet all we hear about is fossil fuels. Energy-related CO2 emissions are expected to increase 20% by the year 2040. Yet emissions from agriculture are predicted to increase 80% by 2050. This devastating figure is mostly due to a projected global increase in meat and dairy consumption. According to two environmental specialists at the World Bank Group, using the global standard for measuring greenhouse gases, concluded that animal agriculture was responsible for 51% of human-caused climate change when the loss of carbon sinks, respiration, and methane are properly accounted for, which the UN study failed to address. But not only that, I found out that raising animals for food is responsible for 30% of the world's water consumption, occupies up to 45% of the Earth's land, is responsible for up to 91% of Brazilian Amazon destruction, is the leading cause of ocean dead zones, habitat destruction, and species extinction. Almost a third of the planet's land is becoming desert, with the vast majority due to livestock grazing. Doing research on grass-fed livestock, I kept coming across the work of Alan Savory. Savory claims that the best way to reverse this desertification is to actually graze more animals. This is the same man, during the 1950s, working as a research officer for the game department of what is now Zimbabwe, came up with a theory that actually elephants were the cause of desertification there. And his solution was convincing the government to kill 40,000 elephants. Yet, after 14 years of relentless slaughter, the conditions only got worse. His theory was wrong. The culling finally ended, but not until tens of thousands of elephants and their families were killed. This is not someone I would ever take ecological advice from.
My calculations are that without using any gas or oil or fuel ever again from this day forward, that we would still exceed our maximum carbon equivalent greenhouse gas emissions, now the 565 gigatons, by the year 2030, without the electricity sector even, or energy sector even factoring in the equation, all simply by raising and eating livestock.
If you reduce the amount of methane emissions, the level in the atmosphere goes down fairly quickly.
and within decades, as opposed to CO2, if you reduce the emissions to the atmosphere, you don't really see a signal in the atmosphere for 100 years or so.
It's an environmental disaster that's being ignored by the very people who should be championing. Deforestation, land use, water scarcity, the destabilization of communities, world hunger, the list doesn't stop.
But that's the thing too, as they say, if you use less coal, what you're buying, you know, less meat.
Yeah. I think they focus grouped it as a political loser. In terms of, because they're membership organizations, you know, a lot of them. They're looking to maximize the number of people making contributions, and if they get identified as being anti-meat or challenging people on their everyday habits, that's something that's so dear to people that it will hurt with their fundraising.
When you really look at who's benefiting and who's lobbied for this system of agriculture, it's the largest food producers in the country and the largest meat producers. And once they become so large and wealthy, then they can dictate the federal policies around producing food because they have so much political power.
They do not want to address the primary driving cause of environmental devastation, which is animal agriculture, because they're businesses and they want to make sure that they have a reliable source of funding.
When I went on Rainforest Action Network's website, I couldn't believe I didn't see anything about cattle. But I did see they had a large campaign against palm oil. Palm oil plantations are causing tremendous deforestation in the Indonesian rainforest. It is estimated that palm oil is responsible for 26 million acres being cleared, though compared to livestock and their feed crops, they were responsible for 136 million acres of rainforest lost to date. On their website, I was shocked to find cattle was not included as one of their 4 main key issues. Instead, they focused on palm, pulp and paper, coal, and tar sands. How could they not have the leading cause of rainforest destruction? I had to wonder, why focus on fossil fuels and not cattle?
Is it more fossil fuels or is it more animal agriculture?
I don't know why we would ever do a one or the other.
I'm just wondering what is it?
I don't necessarily know what it is.
91% of the loss of rainforest in the Amazon area thus far to date, 91% that's been destroyed is due to raising livestock.
Could the executive director of one of the world's largest rainforest protection groups honestly not know what was going on? Or even worse, were they hiding it on purpose? And if so, why? I immediately went to Amazon Watch to see if they would say what the leading cause of rainforest destruction truly is.
The most biologically and culturally diverse place on the planet is under massive attack right now. The Amazon rainforest itself could be gone in the matter of the next 10 years.
What is the leading cause of rainforest destruction?
The leading cause of rainforest destruction, I would say, well, just to put it into the context of what Amazon Watch works on, there's many drivers of deforestation, as we call them. Many different reasons and ways that rainforests are destroyed. The ones that cause the most damage and are the most widespread are mega projects, such as oil and gas pipelines, such as mining projects, such as mega dam projects. We're not talking about...
I felt like I was going in circles with all these groups, as if I were stuck in some strange cowspiracy twilight zone where no one could talk about cows. I couldn't believe these organizations just wouldn't say what the leading cause of rainforest destruction truly is. I had to ask one more time.
It's hard to say what is the leading cause of deforestation of the Amazon, because they're all destructive: oil and gas, mining, dams, agriculture. But in terms of land use, in terms of the amount of land that is destroyed by when we talk about, in comparison, all those different causes of deforestation, what is causing the most trees to fall, for example? I think it would definitely be agriculture. Unfortunately, one of the biggest causes of deforestation, definitely in the Brazilian Amazon, is agribusiness, cattle grazing and soy production in particular.
This is really what's going on. Why do you think that's like no Greenpeace or no one is saying the whole story?
The whole story about one of the main cause of deforestation. And I think you brought up some really good points about why isn't anybody doing anything about this? And I think in Brazil in particular, I think when we look at what happened after the forest code was passed, and people who were standing up against the lobbyists and the interests, the special interests, the cattle industry, the agribusiness industry, what was happening to them? A lot of people who were speaking out got killed. And if you look at, say Carlos, you look at Claudia, there's people who are putting themselves out there and saying, cattle ranching, is destroying the Amazon. A lot of those people who are really putting themselves out there, and look at Dorothy Stang, the nun who lived out in 𝙏𝙗, who was killed. A lot of people will speak up. A lot of people just keep their mouths shut because they don't want to be the next one with the bullet to their head.
Sister Dorothy Stang was a US-born nun living in the heart of the Brazilian rainforest. Her life's work was to protect the Amazon. She spoke out openly against the destruction of rainforests from cattle ranching for years. Walking home one night, she was brutally gunned down at point-blank range by a hired gun from the cattle industry. Greenpeace, unwilling to be interviewed, I had to find a different avenue for answers. There's something really fishy going on over there. Fortunately, I found a former Greenpeace board of director who now speaks openly about the industry.
Environmental organizations, like other organizations, are not telling you the truth about what the world needs from us as a species. It's so frustrating when the information is right before their eyes. It's documented in peer-reviewed papers and journals. It's there for everybody to see, but the environmental organizations are refusing to act. Nowhere do you find in the policies, and nowhere do you find in the Greenpeace mission that diet is important, that animal agriculture is the problem. They are refusing, like other environmental organizations, to look at the issue. The environmental community is failing us, and they're failing ecosystems. And it's so frustrating to see them do this.
I was invited to a meeting with 𝙏𝙗𝗺𝙃 and some years ago now, and made these methane arguments, and he was really pushed back. And then that's just his argument. It's hard enough to get people to think about CO2. Don't confuse them.
I think that the problem with a lot of organizations that are focused and have a laser focus don't go off message because they don't want to piss off another whole group of people that will make their lives difficult. How can these organizations not know? I mean, the issue is right in front of them. It's unmistakable at this point. And just like these organizations, they're falling over themselves to show the general public that climate change is human caused. And in doing so, they completely fail to see what's right in front of them, that animal agriculture, raising and killing animals for food, is really what's killing the planet.
I knew I needed to talk to an animal agriculture lobby group to see what they had to say. If they could silence the government, are they influencing and possibly have connections to these environmental groups as well? The Animal Agriculture Alliance, one of the biggest livestock lobby groups in America, has agreed to an interview.
Greenpeace won't give us an interview, but Animal Agriculture Alliance has agreed to an interview. Now that is saying something.
People hear the word GMOs and that's a really scary term, and again, I think agriculture has kind of struggled to explain what that means, but in reality, what we've done is to use technology to make advancements in how we raise crops and how we raise animals.
Does the meat and dairy industry ever support or donate to environmental nonprofits?
I don't know that I would want to comment on that.
Yeah, I don't know.
I
don't know that we would know what they donate to or don't donate to.
Does meat and dairy industry ever support or donate to Greenpeace?
Again, I don't know that I would feel comfortable.
Hey, sorry we didn't get back to you earlier. I have some bad news. Unfortunately, we are no longer able to fund your film project. We had a meeting, and due to the growing controversial subject matter, we have some concerns and have to pull out.
This subject is so controversial. The first person I could think to speak with was Howard Lyman, who had been sued by cattlemen for simply speaking the truth about animal agriculture on the Oprah Winfrey Show.
I was born on the largest dairy farm in the state of Montana in 1938. Grew up my entire life on a livestock farm. Went to Montana State University, got a degree in agriculture. Came back and started a mega agricultural endeavor where I had 10,000 acres of crop, 7,000 head of cattle, and about 30 employees. So I spent 45 years of my life in animal agriculture, and so I've been there, done that. When I was on the Oprah Show, we had the food disparagement law. Now, the food disparagement law, in my opinion, was unconstitutional, but what it basically said, that it was against the law to say something you knew to be false about a perishable commodity. I didn't say anything on the Oprah Show I thought to be false. I went there and told the truth. Now, it took 5 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars to end up extricating myself from the suits from the cattle industry. But if I was to go on the Oprah Show today, say exactly the same thing today that I said back then, I would be guilty. And for me, when they were talking about the food disparagement law, it was the fact of whether I told the truth or not. You can go today and tell the truth, and you will be guilty. Because if you cause a disruption in the profits of the animal industry, you're guilty under the Patriot Act.
Do you think there should be any concern of us making this documentary?
Of course. If you don't realize right now that you're putting your neck on the chopping block, you know, you better take that camera and throw it away.
The animal agriculture industry is one of the most powerful industries on the planet. I think most people in this country are aware of the influence of money and industry on politics, and we really see that clearly on display with this industry in particular. Most people would be shocked to learn that animal rights and environmental activists are the #1 domestic terrorism threat, according to the FBI.
And why is that?
It's a difficult question to answer, why these groups are at the top of the FBI's priorities. I think a big part of it is that they, more than really any other social movements today, are directly threatening corporate profits. You know, when we try to find out how factory farms and how animal agriculture is polluting the environment, they try to claim exemptions to that information, either under national security terms or public safety, trademark issues, business, it's a business secret. We've seen all these attempts to keep people in the dark about what they're actually doing. And one of the largest industries on the planet with the biggest environmental impact, trying to keep us in the dark about how it's operating. Through the Freedom of Information Act, we obtained documents from the Counterterrorism Unit that show they are monitoring my lectures, media interviews like this one, my website, my book.
We risk filming this and showing it.
You're going up against people that have massive legal resources. I mean, it's just overwhelming, the amount of money at their disposal, and you have nothing. And I think that fear is a big part of the tactic as well.
Will was right. I was scared. When I learned about the activists being killed in Brazil, I was disturbed, but I felt removed. But to learn about American activists and journalists being targeted by the industry and FBI, my funding being dropped, I was genuinely worried and it hit close to home. Was this why no one was willing to talk about the issue? I decided to take precautionary measures with all the footage I shot.
On land has caused more than created more than 500 nitrogen-flooded dead zones around the world in our oceans, comprise more than 95,000 square miles of areas completely devoid of life. So any meaningful discussion about the state of our oceans has to always begin by frank discussions about land-based animal agriculture, which is not what our conservation groups, Oceana being the largest one in the world right now, the most influential, as well as others, it's not what is at the apex of their discussion.
The UN reported that 3/4 of the world's fisheries are overexploited, fully exploited, or significantly depleted due to overfishing.
The oceans are under siege like never before, and marine environments are in trouble. And if we don't wake up and do something about it, we're going to see fishless oceans by the year 2048. That's the prediction from scientists.
The fact that when people look at fishing, sometimes they're only looking at the fact of the animals who are actually consumed by humans, and we're not necessarily looking at all the animals who are caught in the drift nets, all the other animals who are killed in the industry.
We're at over 28 billion animals were pulled out of the ocean last year. They're not ever given a chance to recover. They can't recover. They don't multiply that quickly. They don't, they don't come back. We're not giving them an opportunity.
The way fishing is done today to feed the demand for 90 million tons of fish is primarily through massive fish nets. For every single pound of fish caught, there's up to 5 pounds of untargeted species trapped, such as dolphins, whales, sea turtles, and sharks, known as 𝘼𝙧𝙀𝗆𝗏. If we were to imagine this same sort of practice happening on the African savanna, targeting gazelle, but in the process scooping up every single lion, giraffe, ostrich, and elephant, nobody would stand for it. Yet, this is what is happening in our oceans every single day.
And we're in the middle of the largest mass extinction of species in 65 million years. The rainforest is being cut down at the rate of an acre per second. And the driving force behind all of this is animal agriculture, cutting down the forest to graze animals and to grow soybeans. Genetically engineered soybeans to feed to cows and pigs and chickens and factory farmed fish. Food-living animals made up, 10,000 years ago, made up 99% of the biomass. And human beings, we only made up 1% of the biomass. Today, only 10,000 years later, which is really just a fraction of time, we human beings and the animals that we own as property make up 98% of the biomass, and wild, free-living animals make up only 2%. We basically completely stolen the world, the earth, from free-living animals to use for ourselves and our cows and pigs and chickens and factory farmed fish, and the oceans have been even more devastated.
Concerned researchers of the loss of species agree that the primary cause of loss of species on our Earth that we're witnessing is due to overgrazing and habitat loss from livestock production on land and by overfishing, which I call fishing, in our oceans.
Between 40 and 50 million sharks each year are killed in fishing lines and fishing nets as bykill. Then their fins might be cut off or not cut off, but they're caught initially as bykill. And it's from fishing. It's from fishing in a sustainable manner, in many cases, for fish that are labeled sustainable by, for instance, Oceana and these sustainable certified organizations. So if you're concerned about sharks, which all these organizations are, and most of the public at large is now, if we really are concerned about sharks, we would ban fishing. But you get into this serial depletion, where one fish species will be minimized, and the fishing industry for that fishery will move on to the next species. And it's called serial depletion, aptly named. And in the process, so the fish are being lost, not only the species is being lost, but the next in line is being lost, and then the mechanism is still extremely destructive. So they're losing the fish species, but it needs to be kept in mind they're also destroying habitat.
I think they came up with this term, sustainable fishing, to make ourselves feel good about eating fish and continuing to take fish out of the oceans, when in fact really it's Sea Shepherd's position that there is no such thing as sustainable fishing.
Seafood is not a protein source for a sustainable protein source for the feeding of the planet, of the people on the planet. So it's not.
People don't want to hear it because that makes them feel like they have to take action, they have to stop doing something, and a lot of people don't want to, and people don't want to, they don't want to put it out there because it's uncomfortable. They don't want to propose to tell people what to do, but we're at a point where we all have to be cognizant, and we have to realize we have to take an action.
Our founder, Captain Watson, likes to say, if the oceans die, we die. That's not a tagline, that's the truth.
Perhaps the only other ecosystem that is being destroyed at such a rapid rate are the world's rainforests. Our global rainforests are essentially the planet's lungs. They breathe in CO2 and exhale oxygen. An acre of rainforest is cleared every second, and the leading cause is to graze animals and grow their feed crops. That is essentially an entire football field cleared every single second. And it is estimated that every day, close to 100 plant, animal, and insect species are lost due to rainforest destruction.
If anyone cares about wild horses and wildlife and public lands and the environment, you can't ignore the livestock, the impact, the negative impact that livestock raising is having on our public lands in the West.
I love animals, and that's why I'm in the meat business.
It's what more of society needs to see, is that packaged piece of meat is a living animal. Living, breathing creature that, it's hard. But like what Donica said earlier, we do it because we love them.
With the land use, there's anywhere with industrial as low as 2 to 2.5 acres per cow, all the way up to some, depending, it's not as lush as this, up to 35 acres.
Yeah, we have a ranch in South Dakota that's 50 acres. Yeah, it's about 50 acres, yeah.
And why is that?
Same thing, it was just farmed and robbed of all the nitrogen, the land.
It's also seasonal, right?
It's also seasonal.
Is it possible, and is it practical for the whole world to, say, have grass-fed cattle? And like, say, Brazil, where 80% of the rainforest was destroyed for cattle. What are your thoughts on that?
They shouldn't be eating beef. If their environment wasn't designed to raise beef, then they shouldn't be eating it.
Yeah.
How do you offset the carbon footprint of
livestock?
We don't feel like livestock have a carbon footprint.
Currently, nearly half of all United States land is already dedicated to animal agriculture. If we were to switch over to grass-fed beef, it would require clearing every square inch of the United States, up into Canada, all of Central America, and well in South America. And this is just to feed the United States demand on meat. But that figure doesn't even take into consideration that much of that land isn't suited to graze livestock. We would have to convert all mountain ranges to grassland, clear ancient forests and national parks to grazing, and demolish every city just to make room to graze cows. Just like Brazil, the United States isn't suited to meet the demands for meat.
It takes 23 months for a grass-fed animal to grow to the point, to the size and age that it's slaughtered, whereas a grain-fed takes 15 months. So that's an additional 8 months of water use, land use, feed, waste, and in terms of a carbon footprint, it's a huge difference.
Turns out, due to land use, grass-fed beef is more unsustainable than even factory farming. I had to come to terms with the fact there was no way to sustainably raise enough animals to feed the world's current demand on meat, and had my doubts on dairy as well. But I did want to talk with a premier organic dairy company to see if they believed their product was sustainable for the world's population.
It requires a lot of inputs to produce milk. The feed, the water, the land, it does. And it may not be practical to expect that there can be enough dairy production produced in a sustainable way to feed the entire world. I just don't think that that's necessarily a given. I think it's maybe too much to expect that the world can be fed with dairy in a sustainable way. I don't know the answer, but common sense would say that's a long shot.
I was shocked to hear such an honest answer.
This is amazing. I didn't believe it when I first learned it, but 216,000 more people are born to the planet every day. Every day. It's extraordinary. But what's really extraordinary is you need, per day, 34,000 new acres of farmable land. It's not happening.
To feed a person on an all-plant-based vegan diet for a year requires just 1/6 of an acre of land. To feed that same person on a vegetarian diet that includes eggs and dairy requires 3 times as much land. To feed an average U.S. citizen's high-consumption diet of meat, dairy, and eggs requires 18 times as much land. This is because you can produce 37,000 pounds of vegetables on 1.5 acres, but only 375 pounds of meat on that same plot of land. A high-consuming meat-eating Californian saves 1.4 tons of CO2 equivalent per year by removing beef from their diet. They save 1.6 tons by going vegetarian, and 1.8 tons by going vegan. This is more than switching to solar power for your home or driving a hybrid car. Only switching to electric vehicle saves more, which still though few can afford. But unlike an electric vehicle, the savings don't end with greenhouse gases. A vegan diet produces half as much CO2 as an American omnivore, uses 1/11th the amount of fossil fuels, 1/13th the amount of water, and 1/18th of the amount of land. After adding this all up, I realized I had the choice every single day to save over 1,100 gallons of water, 45 pounds of grain, 30 square feet of forested land, the equivalent of 10 pounds of CO2, and one animal's life, every single day.
If we all, as a society, did go vegan, and we moved away from eating animal foods and toward a plant-based diet, what would happen? If we didn't kill all these cows and eat them, then we wouldn't have to breed all these cows, because we're breeding cows and chickens and pigs and fishes. We're breeding them, over and over again. So if we didn't breed them, then we wouldn't have to feed them. If we didn't have to feed them, then we wouldn't have to devote all this land to growing grains and legumes and so forth to feed to them. And so then the forest could come back, wildlife could come back, the oceans would come back, the rivers would run clean again, the air would come back, health would return.
Renewable energy infrastructure such as building solar and wind generators all over our country to reduce climate change. I mean, that's a pretty good idea, but it's projected to take at least 20 years and at least minimally $18 trillion to develop. Another solution to climate change, we could stop eating animals. And it can be done today. It doesn't have to take 20 years, and it certainly doesn't have to take $18 trillion because it costs nothing.
Some people say, well, let's fix CO2 and then we can worry about methane. Well, that's wrong. It's the other way around. It actually makes sense. Do something about methane because you get a response right away.
Quietly and unmistakably, the most powerful thing that someone can do for the environment. No other lifestyle choice has a farther-reaching and more profoundly positive impact on the planet and all life on Earth than choosing to stop consuming animals and live a vegan lifestyle. You don't think we couldn't solve this problem in a heartbeat? I'll tell you what. All we would need is for the environmentalists to live what they profess, and we'd be on a new course in the world.
We will not succeed until we stop animal agriculture. And by succeed, I mean we will not save ecosystems to the extent necessary. We will not have enough food for people around the planet. We will not stop global warming. We will not stop pollution and the dead zones that run off all of the fields of corn and soy that are grown to feed livestock. And we will not stop the hunting of wolves and other predators.
When you take the animal out, well, you also take the greenhouse gas issue out, and you take the food safety issues out, and you take some of the other externalities related to food scarcity out. But one thing that's amazing is, I think you put our values back in. You put values like compassion and integrity and kindness, values that are natural to human beings. You put that in, you build that back into the story of our food. And I think as this begins to progress, I think it also helps people to pause before they eat that egg, before they eat that steak, before they eat that chicken nugget, and ask themselves, is that really what they want, or do they actually want something more?
Some people would say the problem isn't really animal agriculture, but actually human overpopulation. In 1812, there were 1 billion people on the planet. In 1912, there were 1.5 billion. Then, just 100 years later, our population exploded to 7 billion humans. This number is rightly given a great deal of attention, but an even more important figure when determining world population is the world's 70 billion farm animals humans raise. The human population drinks 5.2 billion gallons of water every day, needs 21 billion pounds of food. But just the world's 1.5 billion cows alone drink 45 billion gallons of water every day and eat 135 billion pounds of food. This isn't so much a human population issue, it's a human eating animals population issue. Environmental organizations not addressing this is like health organizations trying to stop lung cancer without addressing cigarette smoking. But instead of secondhand smoking, it's secondhand eating, which affects the entire planet.
82% of the world's starving children live in countries where food is fed to animals in the livestock systems that are then killed and eaten by more well-off individuals in developed countries such as the US, UK, and in Europe.
The fact of it is that we can feed every human being on the planet today an adequate diet if we did no more than take the feed that we are feeding to animals and actually turn it into food for humans. And so somebody trying to justify GMOs, that's like trying to give a drowning man a drink of water.
You can produce, on average, 15 times more protein from plant-based sources than from meat on any given area of land, whether it's
using the same type of land, whether it's a very fertile area in one area of the world or it's an area that's depleted.
If we would reduce the amount of meat we're eating and dairy and eggs, we could allow all these monocrop fields of genetically engineered corn and soybeans to revert back to forest again, to be habitat for animals.
You encourage people to eat less meat and for the tremendous resources required and the toll on the environment.
And on the animal.
And on the animals.
And the workers in the system. And it's a brutal system at every level.
As the world population continues to grow to almost 9 billion people, do you foresee someday that we might just completely have to stop eating meat altogether?
I don't know that we'll completely stop. I think that the amount of meat eaten will decline. There's no way to support 9 ounces per person per day, which is what Americans are eating now. If the Chinese alone decide they want to eat that much, and they've decided they want to eat that much, there's no, we just can't. We don't have enough world to produce the grain to generate that much meat. I think a plant-based diet is the most sustainable.
But what do you recommend for 9 billion people who can eat for the planet to not only sustain but to thrive? Would you throw out an ounce, 1 ounce?
Per meat?
Including dairy,
I don't think I don't know enough. But yeah, it would be on the order of a couple ounces a week. It's not going to be the way we're eating it now. We're gorging on meat. We're eating huge amounts.
Does that include cheese too?
Yeah.
Ounces total?
Yeah, cheese and milk.
Only 2 ounces a week seem like nothing.
They're sold off to beef raising facilities, but we do keep approximately half, and we raise them for 2 years and sell them as organic grass-fed beef.
So all dairy cows eventually go to the beef industry?
Mm-hmm. At some point in time, she's really going to drop off, and so you have to make a business decision at that point. Are you going to keep investing in her, to give milk, or are you going to sell her off again to another dairy or into the beef industry? There's very few places on this planet that have this type of environment, but the demand on dairy-based protein in the world is only going to increase. And there's not enough land on the planet to do this type of dairying around the world. It's just the environment is not going to be that way. The land is not there.
So I guess on a global scale, the conclusion would be dairy is not sustainable.
Unless we start digging up houses and putting pastures back. And the only way to start digging up houses and development is to have less people. We only know that population is going to continue to grow, so that means more commercial dairying, I'm sure.
Either that or some low demand by the people.
Yeah, or some other product's going to take its place. I mean, we see there's all sorts of soy milks and almond milk and a lot of other products that are coming out and different blends. Where you take juices and proteins, and I think you'll see a lot more of that.
He was right. How could cow's milk be sustainable? For when 1 gallon of milk, it takes upwards of 1,000 gallons of water to produce.
Maybe backyard farming was a sustainable solution.
A lot of people don't realize that meat-free chickens, like this guy behind us, they're generally slaughtered at about 42 days old, whereas chickens that are bred for egg production are killed when their productivity starts to decrease, when they start laying less eggs. And that generally happens about 18 months to 20 months.
It doesn't matter if you buy caged eggs from hens on cage-free farms or free-range farms or pasture-based farms. Hi, Carol. It doesn't matter.
It turns out there's a successful movement of sustainable animal alternative food producers based right here in California, funded by big names like Bill Gates and Biz Stone.
When you imagine all those egg-laying hens eating all that soy and all that corn, you have an energy conversion ratio of about 38 to 1. Whereas alternatively, you can find plants, and you can grow those plants, and you can convert those plants into food. And the energy conversion ratio for the plants that we're using to replace the eggs is about 2 to 1, compared to 38 to 1 for us. So our explicit goal is to have the maximum amount of impact by creating this new model that makes the global egg industry entirely obsolete.
We're making the omega products and proving that we can make better tasting food
It's great for you, and it takes 1/20th of the land and resources.
It was a relief to hear I didn't have to eat any animal products to be healthy and even thrive. But I still thought you needed animal manure to grow organic agriculture. It turns out there's an entire movement with people growing food without any animal inputs. I visited Earthworks Urban Farm in Detroit, where they're working with and growing food for the low-income community.
We tend to see ourselves as individuals in a bubble and forget that we inhabit this land and this earth with other creatures. So we have to learn how to share more, I guess. Josh here is working on his garden.
You'll be surprised what you can do with what seems to be not a lot of space. About a 4x8. Yeah.
What's your goal this year? How much do you think you can maximize that?
I would push for 100 at least. 100 Really? That's amazing. So,
the one full year after this was constructed, we doubled our yield to over 14,000 pounds of food.
14,000 pounds?
Yeah.
About how many acres?
About 2.5. So as much food as we produce and we grow, or the earth helps us grow, is we also have to return those nutrients back to the soil. So we like to think of our work as being regenerative, that we're putting as much life-giving substance in the ground as we're taking out.
So just kind of healthier and safer to use vegetarian or vegetable composting and stuff?
Yeah, that's what we found. But also because it takes less time, it's a lot easier to manage.
A lot easier,
yeah.
And the soil's just as rich.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not only is the organic more compassionate, it's also more efficient. And in a society with this many billions of people, we need to be as efficient as possible. Some people might go back and say, if we embrace this primitive approach of only wild animals everywhere, and we go back to like a hunter-gatherer system, that sounds great. But that was 10 million people on the entire continent. Maybe a little bit more, a little bit less, no one really knows.
If I could tell you that you could have the fiber structure of meat, the satiating bite of meat, the protein, and all the nutritional benefits of meat, without actually having animal protein itself. And by doing that, you could address climate change, you could address the human health epidemics that we're seeing, you could address animal welfare, you could address natural resource conservation. Would you make the change?
But what if people just ate less animal products, like going meatless on Mondays?
When you go meatless on Monday, if you ascribe to that campaign, you're essentially contributing to climate change, pollution, depletion of our planet's resources, and your own health, then on only 6 days of the week instead of 7. You're creating a false justification, clearly a false sense of justification for what you're doing on those other 6 days of the week. So in other words, we really shouldn't be resting on our laurels of what you do right, only 1/7 of the time.
You can't be an environmentalist and eat animal products, period. Kid yourself if you want. If you want to feed your addiction, so be it. But don't call yourself an environmentalist.
Just like these environmental groups, I was afraid of what it meant to change, but now I embrace it. All this talk about sustainability sounded like
our planet was on some sort of life support. And I don't want her to simply survive or to sustain, but to thrive. Life today is not about sustainability, it's about thrivability. She's given so much to us for so long, it was time to give back. 108% of everything we have. It felt good. It was in alignment.
The picture you are about to see is the story of a dynamic part of a remarkable new industry. Developed as an insulating material, it had unheard of qualities. It was unbreakable, odorless, tasteless.
Most people, when they think about plastics, if they think about it at all, they think about it as something that magically shows up in an Amazon box or on the store shelf, and then it disappears just as quickly. Maybe you recycle it, maybe you don't, but the plastic is there and gone before you think about it. And what Formosa demonstrates is that story of plastic is much bigger, and I think more challenging than most people recognize. The real excitement for plastics came from the fact that plastics are, above all else, cheap.
New low-cost furniture.
It's not driven by a demand for more plastics here in the US, but it's driven by a massive supply of cheap gas that can be used to produce more plastics, no matter what the true consequences of that are. 99% of what goes into plastics are fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal. And so the human health and the environmental impacts of plastics, they begin not on the store shelf, but at the wellhead and the drill pad, with the release of toxic contaminants into people's air and into people's water. And then those impacts follow the pipelines down to the refineries, to the facilities like Formosa, where they produce the chemical reactions that will create the plastic. And then the plastics enter our kitchen and leak microplastic debris all over our kitchen counters and find their way into our mouths and our bodies. After plastics leave our houses, they go to be disposed of through incinerators that themselves release a host of really highly toxic compounds into surrounding communities. Plastics have been found in drinking water supplies around the world. More than 690 species, including important food species in the marine ecosystems, have been found to have plastics throughout their guts and throughout their bodies. They've been found in agricultural soils, which increases the risk that the toxins that travel with the plastics could enter the food we eat through the ground. And plastics have been detected in human bodies over and over again in countries around the world. This means that we are not only living in a plastic planet, but we are ourselves increasingly becoming plastic.
These people need to be careful if we dealt with severe. Show them what happens when you want to go ahead and screw up everybody's life in this world. You walk into a gun and rob a place, they put your ass in jail. These men are dumping chemicals into the bay and killing people. What's the difference? They have no right. None whatsoever. Especially when you're talking children. You don't ever fuck with children. That's the rule. I'll leave it at that.
We are allowed our freedom, but it is now too dangerous to go outside. Sizzling reports reveal the weather is starting its annual jihad against mankind. The oppressive, stifling heat wave searing the West is tonight delivering some of the most dangerous temperatures of the year. Canada reports its highest temperature of all time, causing some residents to remove their thick plaid shirts before they catch fire. The weather forecast shows a map that looks like America is in flames, because it is. Heavy rain in Australia leads to a bumper harvest of mice.
On dark and on cue, they're here in their thousands, scurrying, scratching, stinking mice. This isn't a mouse problem, it's a mouse plague.
The macabre news only intensifies as pest controllers release snakes in an attempt to control the plague. Biblical floods in Germany put the town of Kreuzberg on the map, while simultaneously washing it off it.
When I was little, the weather was well behaved, you know, it mainly stayed in the sky where it belongs. But now it's been radicalised. It's carrying out extremist weather attacks all over the shop. Weatherism. Is that the word for it? Don't know why it's so angry. Maybe it's been spending too much time on social media. And we've tried pumping all those gases into the sky to calm it down. Decades we've been doing our best at that. Hasn't worked.
Then, in news footage as mesmerizing as it is apocalyptic, water, previously considered the opposite of fire, burst into flames in the Gulf of Mexico. Are you worried about climate change, John?
Makes me a bit anxious, yeah, no, but only about a fifth as when I can't find the fall. I suppose the sea literally burning should probably worry me more than that, but actually, where is the fall? Can someone ring it?
This is Aknowledgements, a suburb of Accra, the capital of Ghana. But local residents have given it a nickname, Sodom and Gomorrah. It's the home of the biggest electronic waste dump and is a livelihood for many. First it feeds them, then it kills them. This is one of the most polluted areas with toxins
and toxic metals on the African continent. No official numbers as to how many people die of deadly poisoning in 𝙏𝙃𝙀𝙀. No one registers the number of diseases caused by this ecological disaster. There are no statistics of it at all in Ghana.
Le pétrole étant abondant et bon marché, la consommation mondiale continue d'augmenter et approche les 100 millions de barils par jour. Les 2/3 du pétrole sont utilisés dans les transports. L'industrie est le principal émetteur de CO2. Dans le secteur maritime, le fioul lourd utilisé par les navires émet 3500 fois plus de soufre que le gasoil, provoquant d'importantes pollutions atmosphériques. Les États-Unis et l'Europe réagissent en créant des zones où la consommation de fioul lourd est interdite. Depuis le début de l'ère moderne du pétrole, de nombreuses marées noires ont provoqué de gros dégâts environnementaux. Le golfe du Niger est probablement la région la plus touchée, avec 60 années de marée noire passées sous silence. Alors que les experts du GIEC tirent la sonnette d'alarme et appellent à diminuer drastiquement les émissions de CO2 pour limiter le réchauffement climatique, on aurait découvert suffisamment de pétrole pour tenir encore au moins 50 ans au rythme actuel. Les compagnies pétrolières restent parmi les plus puissantes au monde. En 2017, 5 d'entre elles figuraient dans le top 10 des entreprises au plus gros chiffre d'affaires. L'Organisation maritime internationale vient d'imposer aux navires de diminuer drastiquement leurs émissions de soufre pour 2020, ce qui pourrait obliger le secteur à quitter le fioul lourd pour utiliser d'autres hydrocarbures, faisant gonfler la demande et donc le prix. Si le prix du baril augmente, on peut envisager que l'exploitation des pétroles non conventionnels reprenne de plus belle, avec probablement de gros enjeux en Arctique où la fonte de la banquise rend possible l'exploration de nouvelles zones potentiellement riches en pétrole.
Se déplacer en avion, cela émet des gaz à effet de serre. Quand le kérosène, c'est-à-dire le carburant, brûle dans les moteurs, cela produit des gaz qui sont rejetés dans l'atmosphère. Et parmi ces gaz, certains contribuent à l'effet de serre et donc au réchauffement climatique.
Inquiets de l'impact environnemental des barrages dans le monde, les chercheurs ont utilisé des images satellites pour les compter et calculer la quantité d'eau qu'ils retiennent. Dans le barrage des Trois-Gorges, elle représente une colonne de 300 mètres de large sur 480 km de haut. Et ce n'est que l'un des 87 000 barrages que compte la Chine, sans parler des autres pays. Les États-Unis en dénombrent presque autant avec 84 000 et leur nombre ne cesse d'augmenter. Aujourd'hui, les 2/3 des grands fleuves du globe ne se jettent plus dans la mer, ce qui met en danger les populations piscicoles, les zones humides et les estuaires. Dans 10 ans, on estime que 93% de toute l'eau des fleuves sera retenue par des barrages. Ces retenues d'eau sont devenues tellement importantes dans l'hémisphère nord que leur poids a modifié l'axe de la Terre et sa vitesse de rotation. Les désastres sont partout. Aux États-Unis aussi, à l'image de ce qui se passe sur le fleuve Colorado. Son cours est jalonné de tellement de barrages et de canaux qui détournent son eau qu'aujourd'hui,
on se retrouve avec un fleuve asséché à 80 km de son embouchure. Ce n'est plus qu'un filet d'eau que j'ai pu arrêter avec le pied.
Plus inquiétant encore, nos réserves souterraines ont atteint un seuil critique. En suivant Sanjayan, nous avons pu constater l'épuisement des aquifères. Ici, en Arizona, on a tellement pompé dans le sous-sol que d'immenses fissures se sont creusées.
On a l'impression d'assister à la fissuration de nos propres fondations.
Et il n'y a pas que l'Arizona qui est touchée. On assiste au même type de phénomène en Californie, à la Nouvelle-Orléans, à Mexico, en Arabie Saoudite, à Bangkok.
C'est un signe.
Shanghai,
c'est clairement un signe
Tokyo,
de dessèchement.
des failles dans le désert, des effondrements dans les villes, des signes qui prouvent qu'aujourd'hui, notre consommation d'eau douce épuise nos réserves. C'est un problème mondial qui n'épargne personne et concerne chacun de nous.
Personne n'est à l'abri. Si on ne gère pas l'eau de manière durable, ce sera le premier point de non-retour pour l'humanité et celui qui fera le plus mal. Prenez par exemple la mer d'Aral.
En Ouzbékistan. C'était autrefois le 4e plus grand lac de la planète. Mais les fleuves qui l'alimentaient ont été détournés pour irriguer les champs de coton.
Ce coton est destiné à l'exportation. Et comme ces fleuves ne vont plus jusqu'à la mer d'Aral, elle s'est asséchée.
En seulement 30 ans, la mer d'Aral a été transformée en désert par la soif d'eau virtuelle due à la culture du coton.
C'est un désastre écologique directement lié à l'exportation du coton. Ça laisse sans voix la vision de ce lac gigantesque avec ses bateaux échoués, qui a disparu de mon vivant. De mon vivant. C'est tellement démesuré qu'on a du mal à concevoir que l'être humain ait pu faire ça.
These are the places where a new virus is most likely to make the leap to humans.
The front line for disease emergence are places like the end of the road in a tropical forest where someone's just built a new mining concession, people have moved in, there's no food supply, so they go out and hunt wildlife. Or it's a farm in Southeast Asia that's been expanding and intensifying, that has bats nearby that spread viruses into the pigs in the farm.
The truth is, human behavior all over the world has made pandemics like this one inevitable. Deforestation is bringing more wild animals into contact with more people. And factory farming is pushing animals closer together, giving their viruses more opportunities to combine into one that could infect us.
We're not going to feed the world, going back to how it was 100 years ago where all the animals were, pasture fed. We didn't just move animals inside and just implement these large vertically integrated systems because of sustainability. It certainly reduces the environmental impact while improving animal well-being and food safety.
So that to say that animals like it just as much being inside, say the chickens and the cows like being just as much inside as pasture grass-fed?
In a lot of cases, it's been a significant improvement in their well-being, just in terms of the amount of care they can get, individualized care.
Then we give them more ways than ever to spread.
I think one of the big lessons about pandemics is we think that it's something happening over there. Well, we know from COVID-19 that what happens over there can very easily get here.
In 2005, the WHO did draw up a huge blueprint for how the world should prepare and respond to a crisis like this. Among other things, countries had to develop the capacity to detect outbreaks and quickly notify WHO. 196 countries signed on to this, but most never complied.
When a pandemic comes along of any size, we always look back and wish we'd invested more. However, very quickly, our memory fades and other priorities are getting the resources.
A recent WHO report even acknowledged there is a very real threat of a rapidly moving, highly lethal pandemic of a respiratory pathogen. The world is not prepared. That was 3 months before the first case of COVID-19. And our healthcare systems obviously weren't prepared.
The Anthropocene is the time in the geological record when humans have moved the planet outside its natural limits.
humans go from being participants in the whole Earth to being a dominant feature,
dominating the oceans, the landscape, agriculture, animals.
It could be a full-scale catastrophic change.
We have not a way to get back. We live now in a different world.
It is such a fundamental change in the way the Earth is behaving that we need to communicate that as powerfully as possible to everybody.
Well, welcome to 𝙏𝙧𝙖, a city a little less than 300 kilometers from Beijing, and one that over the past month has had the rather unenviable honor of being China's most polluted. In fact, by some measures, it is the most polluted city on the planet over that period. Of course, it is just an extreme example of a problem affecting a huge swathe of northern China at the moment, with a pollution cloud hanging over this country from the Russian border in the far northeast all the way down to the central cities of Chongqing and Chengdu, a sweep of a few thousand kilometers or so. Of course, underneath the cloud live hundreds of millions of people, and they are currently struggling with the impact of this toxic air on their lives and livelihoods.
It can be completely dark, as if you're walking in the clouds. The smog impacts my children's health. Coughing is the usual symptom.
I've heard some people say that they are considering leaving 𝙏𝙧𝙖, moving to the south of China. Have you ever thought of doing the same?
Of course I want to leave, but I cannot afford to. I live here. The whole city and the whole country is polluted. You have to go abroad.
Somewhere in that smog in central Beijing, parents come to pick up kids at 𝙏𝙧𝙖 Primary School. The pollution is on everyone's mind.
The air pollution is very, very hot. It's heavy.
The mask, a required school supply. If I don't wear it, she says, the air is smelly and dirty. It hurts my throat. Yeah, but that's the price we pay for a growing economy, says her father. A price most others here say is way too high. Indeed, years of breakneck growth and lax environmental standards have filled smokestacks as much as coal has fueled factories. And even when Beijing orders the dirtiest of these shut, many continue illegally, protected by local officials who don't want to see layoffs. This week, China unveiled an ambitious plan to invest more than $400 billion in wind and solar energy over the next 3 years. But since coal dominates, experts say it could be 2 decades before the air really clears.
So how do you manage in this toxic soup? Well, there's several survival tools for living in Beijing. First, of course, there's the mask, preferably industrial strength, the kind you'd use to clean out toxic chemicals at a factory, for instance. Then there's this gadget. It tests just how bad the pollution really is. Over 380, dangerous for breathing. To put that into context, Toronto, Montreal, or Vancouver, they're all typically under 30 on a bad day.
The health effects have been devastating. Hospitals are full, and one university study here suggests that 1/3 of the deaths in key cities are linked to smog. No wonder this immigration consultant says people want to move away from China.
Yes, some people cannot wait and they choose to move.
Simon Wu says inquiries to his office have never been so high. Even he says he's considering leaving after being socked in by the smog.
And it really depressed me somehow.
In fact, much of Beijing is feeling very blue from all the gray.
Amid mounting public anger across China, the government is pledging to clean up the air and is investing heavily in renewable technology. But there are good reasons for caution and some skepticism. The 2 main sources for all of this toxic smog are the heavy reliance on coal as the dominant form of power generation, and the high and still growing levels of car ownership. And neither of those things look set to change anytime soon.
This is a highway in India, near Delhi. The smog here was so thick, drivers couldn't see where they were going. At least 24 vehicles were damaged, as drivers kept crashing into the pileup. These conditions happen every year when Delhi experiences a huge spike in air pollution.
Are we breathing poison in Delhi?
Every 2 minutes, one person dies due to air pollution in this country.
I get nauseous, I get dizzy.
Hospital या family doctor के पास जाके दिखाना पड़ता है.
When it hits, the nearly 30 million people here are forced to live in a toxic cloud. Scientists estimate that spending a day outside in these conditions is like smoking 50 cigarettes.
As a lung surgeon, when I open the chest, I rarely see a normal pink lung these days.
On the ground, a layer of dust covers the entire city, and in the air, a thick layer of pollution hides landmarks that are easy to see the rest of the year. Delhi has always been a big, busy, polluted city, but in the last decade, something is making it even worse. In the last 10 years, Delhi's population has grown by more than 7 million people. Today, it's the second largest city in the world, and it's also among the most polluted. More people means more cars, spreading dust and exhaust into the air. As Delhi grows, there's also more construction, producing dust particles, and more industries contaminating the environment. All these things make the average air quality in Delhi unhealthy year-round. But something else is happening right here. When air pollution in Delhi spikes in October and November, it sends air pollution levels to 50 times what's considered safe.
Levels go haywire. Many of the machines are not made to measure the levels that we achieve.
The smog is so bad you can see it from space. But this cloud of pollution isn't actually coming from Delhi. It's coming from here. The states of Punjab and Haryana are known as India's breadbasket. They're a key region for the country's agriculture. Farmers here grow rice, and that requires large amounts of water. In the 2000s, rice farming here took off, and farmers in the area started using so much water that the region's groundwater started running low. So to save water, authorities passed a new act in 2009. It bans rice planting before mid-June. That means farmers can't plant rice until right before the monsoon season, when rains come to replenish the groundwater. That pushes rice harvesting later into the year, which means farmers have less time to get their fields ready for their next crop. So to clear the fields more quickly, more and more farmers have started setting their crop stubble on fire. Every year, all those stubble fires form a massive cloud of smoke during October and November, and it heads straight for Delhi. There are two reasons why smoke in this region makes things worse in Delhi. The first is geography. The Himalayan mountains act like a kind of barrier directing the smoke towards Delhi. The second is the weather. During the winter, cold mountain air rushes down from the Himalayas towards Delhi, arriving beneath a layer of warm, lowland air that creates a kind of dome over the city. The warm air keeps pollution trapped on the ground with nowhere to go. So when the stubble fire smoke arrives in Delhi, it mixes with the urban pollution, forming a toxic smog that sits on top of the city. Mix all that together, and you have the most hazardous air pollution of almost anywhere. In November of 2019, India's Supreme Court ruled that states in the north had to stop farmers from burning their crop stubble. But so far, the ruling hasn't been enforced on the ground. In the weeks after the ruling, tens of thousands of crop fires continue to burn in Punjab and Haryana. Delhi doesn't have the ability to stop crop burning in neighboring states. Instead, when pollution spikes in October and November, city officials change the things they can control. Sometimes they'll halt all construction in the city, or put restrictions on vehicle use. Still, until India's ban on crop stubble burning is actually enforced, these spikes will be back every year, making the city's already dangerous pollution even worse and putting the lives of millions at risk.
आज हमको 50-70 साल हो गए दिल्ली रहते हुए, तो आज दिल्ली से कहाँ जाएंगे? हमारी रोजी रोटी सब कुछ यहीं पे है.
What we breathe should be a fresh air.
Après une fête, des déchets, c'est mignon. Afrique, dépendance au plastique.
Another fight, another evening, and there's nothing left to say. I'll drown my thoughts in dreaming till I wake another.
Proof of technology really means that now humanity has found this tool which we can actually clean up the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. You know, until today, you could be the most knowledgeable person in the world, you could be the richest person in the world, but you would have no way to clean it up. I'm confident that now that we have the tools to do it, it will happen.
It's acting on what we know, and acting kindly and gently on the hope by living with other people to accomplish the goals of living better. We can do it, but we have to choose to do it.
Let the truth dig you
You
out.
can change the world. You must change the world.
Love's the key, man.
Where did you go? You used to be right here. Can't feel you anymore. It all just disappeared. I woke up in lonely sheets, and my arms, they are empty. Am I just a warm body? Some skin for you to hold? Or do I lie in your future? Somewhere on my deathbed, where did you go? You used to be right here. Can't feel you anymore. It all just disappeared.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that.